Back in the early 90s, when I was 19, my brother and his wife were newlyweds and living in Baltimore. I'm from Maryland myself, but I had not spent any time in the city at that point. I knew it wasn't entirely safe in certain areas, but I was just going straight to my brother's house, so it would be fine, right? Well, I ended up turning onto the wrong street, MLK Boulevard. And back then it was just a stretch of abandoned gas stations, sketchy bars, and boarded up houses. There were a few men walking in the middle of the street, drinking out of brown paper bags. I knew that I had messed up big time, but instead of freaking out and getting even more lost, I pulled into an abandoned gas station where there was a bank of payphones and parked about 10 feet from them, then hopped out to call my brother. Remember, this was about 30 years ago. No cell phones in those days. He was impatient at first because my brother knew the city quite well, but this was my first time driving in it, and I was trying to write down his directions as he gave them to me. Just then, I looked over at my car, and the three men who were walking down the street were now leaning against it. Two on the passenger side, and one against my driver's side door. They were staring at me with their arms crossed. I began to silently cry, thankful that I had on sunglasses at the time. My brother heard me sniffling and said, "Why do you sound so upset? I'm just giving you directions." I couldn't tell him what was going on, as the men were within earshot. I wrote down the rest of the directions, put them in my pocket, and began walking back toward my car. The man leaning against my door reached up and wiped the tears from one cheek. Then he said, "Why are you crying, hon? Nothing bad has happened yet." Without hesitation, I responded, "I just shot my boyfriend. The cops are..." That was all I got out. The three men had taken off in separate directions at full sprint. If I hadn't been gifted that lie from my guardian angels or whoever, who knows what could have happened to me that day. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in Maryland about 15 minutes from the border to Washington, D.C. We never had any serious crimes in our area, just the typical petty theft from people leaving their car doors unlocked. It was a chilly, gloomy Saturday in October of 1993. I was 8 years old back then. My brother James was 12. We had just left his friend's house after playing street hockey in his driveway, and we had to get back home around 5:30. His house is a couple of blocks away from the elementary school, and across the street from there is a pretty big-sized park. Along that road, there's a fence that extends from the park's entrance to a cul-de-sac, where we lived. My brother and I approached a nearby four-way stop and noticed a white 1990 Toyota Camry sitting there. We didn't think anything of it and continued down the sidewalk toward the school. I was talking to him about the Washington Redskins and how we could ride in to get an autograph from Art Monk. He's a famous football player. I noticed that James was oddly quiet during my rambling. I asked him if he was listening, and he responded, "Keep talking, act normal, and don't look back, okay?" Confused and nervous, I responded, "Okay, what's going on?" My brother had been paying attention to the Camry ever since we saw it. It was now driving slowly behind us. We played it cool and kept walking our normal pace. As we were approaching the school, my brother put his hand on my chest, which made me stop immediately. He turned back and glanced at the driver. Now, I wasn't sure if he was trying to see how the driver would react if we wanted to make a move across the street to the park, or if he was trying to see a license plate. However, when we stopped, the car stopped. This time I got a good look. The driver was a female with brunette hair. She looked almost drugged out. She never blinked, she just stared straight ahead. Not at us, not to the side, directly straight. The passenger was the intimidating one. He was a redhead, long hair, and he had this angry look in his eyes. To be honest, he kind of looked like an evil Carrot Top. After getting a good look and realizing the situation we were in, I began to get nervous. My breathing slowed, my legs went numb, and I looked at my brother, and he just said, "Keep walking." What was weird about that day was that there weren't any cars on the road. It felt like a ghost town. It was just us and them. We continued walking toward the next block, when suddenly the Camry started merging into the other lane. They were attempting to block us off, and then, who knows what. My brother, being the older one, looked around before saying, "On the count of 3, follow me and run as fast as you can." Before I could even say anything, he started his countdown. 3, 2, 1. We took off running, my brother charging ahead, and me trying to keep up. The Camry accelerates. James is able to make it across the street, but the car almost hits me, missing by inches. The Camry turns around and comes after us again. My brother sprints across towards the cul-de-sac, and I followed the best I could. I then realized he was making a run for our friend's house, who lived on this block. Once we got to his doorstep, we immediately started ringing the doorbell and banging on the front door like crazy. The Camry pulls up, and the passenger emerges from the car. As soon as he did, my friend's dad opens the door. We then rush inside. Carrot Top hops back in the Camry, and they speed off. My friend's dad runs out toward the car as it took off, yelling something as he tried to get a license plate. My brother and I were pretty shaken up, and even though we lived only a block away, we called our dad to come pick us up. We contacted the police and filed a report, and they said they would keep their eyes open. The following Monday, we notified the elementary school about the ordeal. However, they didn't do much to let the public know, at first. It wasn't until a week later they sent out a flyer to the rest of the parents, and the cops began patrolling the neighborhood more often. During that same week, 3 other cases were reported involving a white Camry, following kids around and trying to kidnap them. There was one I heard that was even more terrifying than our experience, where the kids were jumping through backyards because Carrot Top was chasing after them. After that week, everything eventually calmed down. No arrests were ever made. I don't know if they moved on to another town and tried the same thing there. All I know is that they had our neighborhood terrified for an entire year, and it took a while for things to seem normal again. I live in the mountains of western Maryland. A few months ago, I was out hiking with a friend. We were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we had done several times before. We decided to stop and take some pictures at the trail summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches, tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and chatting after taking a few snapshots when I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot by himself. He seemed to be wandering aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me was the man was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We eventually set off on the last 2-mile leg of the trail. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and into the mountainside. At the end is a second parking lot, where our car was. You don't have a whole lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk in single file because of how narrow it is. I was walking in front and talking to my friend who was behind me. I turned to look at her, and I see the same man from before behind her, following at a close distance. I immediately got this gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have a backpack on or hiking gear and wasn't even wearing boots. There was something about the look in his eyes that really spooked me. So after a bit more walking, he continues to follow very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass, just in case he was only following closely because he wanted to go faster than us. She seemed to catch on to what I was doing, and we step off the trail. He looks startled when my friend politely says hello. He just stared at us. This was when I noticed that he was carrying a stick. Then, without saying a word, he passes us. We wait for him to get some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait a bit longer until he gets to the furthest part of the trail that is still within our sight, and he turns around and looks up at us. We decided that something feels too off about this guy, and we didn't want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and walk back up the trail toward the park. After a few minutes of backtracking, I look behind us and see him walking up the trail as well. I tell my friend to go a little faster. We book it and got back to the first parking area, and then began to strategize and wait, deciding that we should remain here to see if he emerges again. There were more people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by, and nothing. We started talking about how this could have meant that he kept going on the trail and is now long gone, or is waiting in a more deserted area to possibly ambush us. We then see an older couple coming from the trail in that direction. We approached them and asked if they saw anyone on their way up. They told us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They described the man who had been following us. We explained our interaction with him and get into a back and forth conversation on whether or not he was a threat. That's when the husband finally interjects and says, "We should call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and seemed to be sharpening that stick he was holding." The wife was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but we ended up calling a ranger after hearing that. The nice couple escorted us back to our car to make sure we got there safely. The rangers contacted us later on. They walked the trail, but by then, the man was long gone. I wish I knew where he went off to, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legit when it comes to sensing danger. I've been a fan of your channel for some time now. I've noticed that you've done some first-hand accounts of murders that have taken place in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think every family has a story where they were a small part of some very unfortunate history. When you announced that you were doing a video on Maryland, I had to call up my Uncle Roger. This is his story, and I'll be writing it from his perspective as he told it to me. March 29th, 1982 is a day that I'll never forget. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. Columbia was known as a quiet, safe town where middle-class families lived and commuted to work in Baltimore, which is about 30 minutes from there. I was 17 at the time, and I used to ride my bike down one of the narrow pathways to the village center. That day I was just going to grab a pop from one of the shops there, and then maybe waste a few quarters at the local arcade afterward. Mom was working late at the hospital that day, so I had some time to kill. I was about halfway down the path when I saw a woman walking ahead of me. She was maybe in her late 20s, wearing a light jacket and jeans, with her hair pulled back into a ponytail. I didn't think much of it at first. People are always walking to the village center. But I remember specifically she was singing a tune to herself. It was soft, but clear, like she didn't care who heard, and I knew the song, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. They played it on the radio all the time. Not wanting to startle her by flying past on my bike, I slowed down. She must have heard the squeak of my brakes, because she glanced back at me when I stopped. Our eyes met for a second, and I felt a little embarrassed. She had this tired look in her eyes, but her smile was warm. Sorry, I said. It's okay, kid. Let me get out of your way. I gave a dumb nod, the kind you do when you're an awkward teenager who doesn't know how to communicate with adults. She waved me on. I pedaled past and made my way toward the village center. The rest of that day was uneventful for me. This encounter may not sound like anything special, but it turns out I was one of the last people to see that woman alive. Her name was Lainey Lee McGadney. She got into a car at some point after I passed her on the path, a brown Ford LTD, but no one could provide an accurate description of whoever was driving that car. Her body was later discovered on a vacant lot nearby. She had been raped and murdered. Despite police efforts, the case remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. It left a lasting impact on the community due to the brutal nature of the killing. Columbia's reputation as a safe town also died that day. In 2021, a breakthrough in DNA evidence linked a man named Howard Jackson Bradbury Jr. to the crime. This development provided some closure, but questions still remain about the exact circumstances, potential accomplices, or why McGadney was targeted. This murder is still considered a significant unsolved tragedy in Maryland's history. Growing up in Maryland, I've had my fair share of weird and creepy encounters. This particular incident has left me truly horrified. Even now, when I think about it, I can't help but to feel uneasy. It was back in September of last year. These events took place, ironically, on Friday the 13th. My boyfriend Zach was visiting when this happened. At first, everything was going great, and all seemed normal. But when Friday came around, that's when things went south. Zach and I decided to go to the local mall to see the new Beetlejuice movie, and I was wearing a black and white dress with flat black slippers. We took a lift to get there, and nothing seemed weird at first. But when we walked inside the mall, that's when I saw this man. He looked like he was in his 50s or 60s, overweight, and had gray hair. He also wore a thick pair of glasses with a blue shirt on and shorts. He was staring at us, and not trying to hide it either. Then we went to go grab some food at a Chinese restaurant in the mall. Once we sat down, I noticed that the man had followed us there. At first, I was willing to dismiss him as just some gawking creep, but then I started to get uncomfortable. We still had some time to kill, so we stopped by the bookstore. After browsing around, we walked out, and I saw the man again, shadowing us. I would have mentioned something to Zach, but I suddenly had to use the restroom bad. It was at that point I was regretting the Chinese. Zach waited outside the restrooms, so I didn't worry about the man following me in there. But there was something about this guy that really unnerved me. I didn't know if he was waiting for Zach to leave me by myself before he made some kind of move. When I walked out, my stalker was nowhere in sight, and I was relieved. Zach and I went to go see the movie, and I tried to put this in the back of my mind. By the time the end credits were rolling, I had almost forgotten about the creep in the glasses. That was until when we got up to leave. I saw him, sitting a few rows behind us. He was staring directly at me, again. I was so freaked out that I ran out of the theater and into the lobby to call my mom. I told her what was going on, and she said to go get security. But the only problem was that the mall was now dead, and I didn't see any guards in sight. I lost sight of the man in the exiting crowd. We eventually took a lift back to my house. On the way home, I noticed a blue car following us, and I had a feeling I knew who was behind the wheel. It finally turned down another street about 10 minutes or so from where I live. Ever since that night, from time to time, I swear I see that same blue car parked in the street outside my house. Perhaps I'm just being paranoid, but whenever I go out with friends or to run some errands in town, I feel that someone is watching me. I'm sharing this story as a warning to please pay attention to your surroundings. Even if you're on a date or with people you trust, you never know who's watching. There's always a reason to be afraid.